Recording in progress.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We start now the ceremony of opening of the 30th Conference of the United Nations about climate change, the Parliamentary meeting. This meeting has as an objective to closer the parliamentarians of the negotiations about climate change with the objective of finding effective solutions in facing this problem. Besides promoting this discussion in Parliament and the electoral basis of these public agents. This edition is organized by the IPU, Interparliamentarian Union, in partnership with the Brazilian Parliament, and it takes place in the heart of the Amazon in the city of Belém, at the headquarters of the Legislative Assembly of the state of Pará. We take the advantage to note the thanking of the Legislative Assembly in supporting this event, especially of its President, Congressman Chicão, whom we greet in the name of all the other parliamentarians and public workers of this Legislative House. Now, the panel of opening panel, representing the President of the National Congress, Senator Davi Alcolumbre, Senator Humberto Costa, Rapporteur of this meeting, representing President of the Chamber of Deputies, Congressman Hugo Mota, Congressman Claudio Cajado, member of the Executive Committee of the IPU, Mr. Judicial Assistant of the UNFCCC, Jean-Luc Crisp. Right now, we invite Mr. Jean-Luc Crisp to read the remarks of the Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC about climate change, Simon Stiell.
Honorable speakers and members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to join you today. On behalf of the UNFCCC Executive Secretary, Simon Stiell, I'm grateful to have this opportunity to share with you, distinguished parliamentarians from around the world, some remarks on the important climate change negotiations taking place here in Belém. I thank the Interparliamentary Union and the Parliament of Brazil for inviting the UNFCCC Secretariat to join. Parliaments are the living voice of democracy. You turn citizen concerns into laws, budgets, and oversights, into real-world action. And a few issues unite or define this century more than climate change. When your parties are in government, you can shape ambition. When you are in opposition, you can demand accountability. Always, you are the bridge between public will and political action. The Paris Agreement was born from politics, from courageous leadership that look beyond what divides us to focus on what unites us. 10 years on, we can see that the Paris Agreement has changed the world. Because of the choices countries made together, humanity now has bent the curve of emissions downwards for the first time in history. The projections remain too high, but we are moving together, and the real economy is moving too. Last year, global investment in renewables hit $2 trillion. And over 90% of new power capacity installed was clean. This is an economic transformation, creating jobs, enhancing energy efficiency, improving health, and strengthening resilience and security. But we all know there is so much more to do. We need more speed, more scale, more fairness. Disasters like Hurricane Melissa and Typhoon Jalawat remind us daily that any delay carries a human cost that is measured in lives, livelihoods, and lost futures. This is why COP30 is so important. a moment when we turn the lessons of the first decades of the Paris Agreement into the acceleration the next decade demands. And parliamentarians have a decisive role to play. First, you can raise ambition. Your leadership can ensure that national climate and adaptation plans are ambitious, credible, and actionable. You can bring climate into every sectorial debate and make sure policy coherence drives the transformation forward, not back. Second, you can make ambition real by ensuring budgets align with climate commitments. You can help to point finance towards clean energy, resilient infrastructures, and sustainable livelihoods, and away from harmful subsidies. Third, you can drive accountability and trust. Transparency reports give you the tools to track progress, identify gaps, and demand results. Use them. They are the foundation of credibility, showing that plans drive progress that people can see and feel. Ultimately, this is about connecting climate actions to people's daily lives. Better jobs, cleaner air, safer homes, and stronger communities. Parliaments can make that connection real, ensuring that climate cooperation translates into tangible improvements in living standards for everyone, everywhere. Colleagues, the first decades of the Paris Agreement built the foundation. The next decades must deliver speed and scale. This is our moment to prove that climate action is not a burden, but an opportunity for growth, justice, and resilience. Let this COP and your leadership within it show the world that climate cooperation is alive and strong, and that democracy itself remains one of its most powerful engines. On behalf of the Executive Secretary, thank you very much for your support, and we look forward to working with you here at COP30 and beyond. Thank you.
We will now hear the representative of the Chamber of Deputies, Congressman Claudio Cajado. Your Excellency, Senator Humberto Costa, Rapporteur of this meeting, Your Excellency Gianluca Cris, Representative Mr. Simon Stiell, Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC, ladies and gentlemen parliamentarians, Congressman Bongas, Congressman Zaracini, Congresswoman Laura Carneiro, Benedita da Silva, Gisela Gross, Mary Serafim, public workers of the Chamber of Deputies, of the Senate, of the IPU, and of the Legislative Assembly of the State of Pará, ladies and gentlemen. I wish to tell you all the greetings from the President Hugo Mota, that has entrusted upon me the responsibility to represent you as the host of this meeting held at COP30 in Belém do Pará. It's a great satisfaction for the Brazilian Parliament to receive the parliaments of the world here in Belém, at the heart of the Amazon territory that synthesizes the urgency and the magnitude of the climate challenge. We are before a global scenario more alarming. The 2024 year was the hottest of history. Projections of the Meteorological Organization of the World indicate that the average temperature can rise above 1.9 degrees centigrade in the next years. This means that the world will live with extreme droughts, floods, heat waves, and fires with deep impacts for the populations, serious impacts for all the planet. But it's important to say always that it hits disproportionately women, youth, elderly, people with disabilities, indigenous peoples and vulnerable communities. Such a complex scenario and alarming demands cooperation, international cooperation that is robust. It demands the strengthening of the partnerships among countries, scientific institutions, civil society, and parliamentarians. It demands the commitment with climate justice and with the experience of peoples and traditional territories. It also demands the updating that's ambitions of the NDCs, the National Determined Contributions. It demands funding, adequate funding and financing, especially for developing countries. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the time to reaffirm our protagonism of the parliaments in the task of changing the trajectory of the climate policies depend on strong parliaments able to transform goals into laws and ensure the right oversight. The topic of climate change is extremely relevant for Brazil. Since 2008, a parliamentarian committee that is permanent on climate change follows up, monitors, and oversees in a continuous manner the actions referring to climate in Brazil. Through this committee and of the Environmental Committee of the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate, we had dozens of seminars, public hearings with experts, governments, and civil society. We debated the meeting of the goals proposed by Brazil related to the commitment to fight climate change. We are also active part of the discussions at the COPs held every year. Over the last years, we approved a number of laws facing climate change, environmental conservation, and sustainable development. It's about in a consistent agenda based technically and aligned with the need to modernize the country for the new green economy, matching environmental protection, economic growth, and social inclusion. I highlight some of these norms. We updated the management of public forestries, regulating the exploitation of other activities that are non-related to wood, the improvement and trade of carbon credits. We approved the law of the National Plan of Adaptation of Climate Change that establishes guidelines for the reduction of the vulnerabilities, environmental, social, economic, and infrastructurally, before the adverse effects of the climate change. We gave a legal form to the national policy of the managed fire management, an essential tool to prevent and fight forest fires with a scientific basis, strengthening the work of the states. Besides that, we established measures to support the government, the states, and the federal district, making easier the transfer of funds of the national funds of environment for the other entities in emergency situations. The law creates a new fund for the recuperation of extreme climatic events. The new law of licensing, environmental licensing, and the Pantanal statute completes this legislative block. The first regulates and modernizes the licensing of activities or businesses that use environmental resources. The second one protects one of the most sensitive biomes in the planet with clear rules of sustainable use of the Pantanal lands, of incentives to the ecotourism and the value of the local communities. This archive adds one of the legislations that's among the most modern and rigorous of the planet, as it illustrates well our forest code. Also highlight our legislative effort in favor of the energy transition area in which Brazil is in a leadership position. In 2024, Our renewable sources participate with 51% of the internal offer of energy. For, as a comparison, the world average of the participation of the non-fossil sources, including nuclear, was just of 13.5% of the energy consumed. Our country holds today an electric matrix of over 89% of renewable sources. However, the Brazilian Parliament remains working to enhance the conversion of the clean sources of energy. We approved the legal mark of the mini generation of energy that allows the consumers produce their own energy with solar energy, for example, and they use the excess of energy to reduce the consumption with the generation in excess produced. We had a constitutional amendment that gives differential competitiveness to biofuels. We approved the program MOVER that stimulates the automotive innovation and strengthen mobility of low-carbon mobility, besides a number of laws that structure the entire chain of renewable hydrogen and biofuels. We transformed into law an acceleration program of energy transition that creates an instrument as the Green Fund and the condition to sustainable investment. We approved the legal mark of offshore energy that enhances the possibility of energy generation in the ocean, especially through wind source. We also adopted the incorporation of modern systems of energy storage into our electric system to improve the wind and solar energy, reducing the use of fossil fuels and guarantee safety and good tariffs. The Congress examines right now other measures of great relevance, the institution of special regimen for tax for information centers and data centers with clean energy. We hope to promote the growth of the infrastructure needed for the development of AI without the energy coming from fossil sources. Ladies and gentlemen, as one of the hosts of this interparliamentary meeting in Belém, I wish that we leave here strengthened in our capacity of cooperation and converging with the conviction that we need climate policies that are specific, guided by science, and based upon the principles of justice and equity. I thank the participation, the support, and the goodwill of all. I also thank the people of Pará that so warmly has received us in this land. My thanks also to the Legislative Assembly of Pará, in the name of its president, Congressman Chicão, whose support was determinant for the success of this meeting. I wish, therefore, an excellent discussion and that our final document will bring a valuable contribution with the voice of the parliaments of the world, so that the struggle against climate change and the future sustainable for all will be successful. Thank you so much.
We register the presence of Mr. President of Alepa, Congressman Chicão. We invite for his speech, his pronouncement, Senator Humberto Costa, representing the National Congress of Brazil. Good morning to all. I wanted to greet Mr. Gianluca Crispi, judicial advisor of UNFCCC, my noble friend Claudio Cajado, that is representing the Chamber of Deputies of Brazil. I wanted to greet and thank Congressman Chicão, President of the Legislative Assembly of Pará, for welcoming us in his facilities for this event. I wanted to greet all ladies and gentlemen, congressmen and congresswomen, members of the Parliament Union. I wanted to greet all congressmen from Brazil that are present here, all friends that are here today. In name of the President of our Senate, Brazilian Senate, Davi Alcolumbre, I want to greet everybody that is here present, desiring success in all the activities, and I hope that you have a good time in all activities of this forum and this climate convention. It's instigating and satisfying to notice that here we have more than 40 countries that are really well represented by you, parliamentarians and everybody that is here in this meeting. We did in the last edition agreements related to climate, and we reinforced the role of parliaments in climate governance, reaffirming the importance of translating and creating action policies that are based in science. There we had movements for bigger engagement of our legislators related to relevant policies that are turned to more investments, the acceleration of energy transitions, and initiatives for forest conservation, oceans, and biodiversity. Here in the heart of the Amazon forest, the ecosystem, in this edition in Belém, in a celebration to the rich diversity, we're going to continue with big steps, calling all parliamentarians to accelerate the engagement for actions towards the climate is the commitment of international relations that involve the implementation of environmental policies with the main goal of having a sustainable society. And for that, we need to reinforce and consolidate the public choice of our parliamentarians that are turned to a policy that is politics that are multilateral related to the climate. Our impression and our feeling is that the parliamentarians advance in the debates approaching a strong exchange for the discussion of regulatory remarks about the climate. In second place, the adoption of surveillance methods and transparency about their commitments. Third place, prioritize resources in our budgets to stimulate resilient infrastructures that support all groups and vulnerable populations, protecting them from climate disasters. In the document that we're going to extract from this meeting, we draw a few worries with general global warming and pre-industrial levels and the effects of climate changes on women, elderly, youngsters, and traditional communities, and also vulnerable communities that are affected by the high frequency of climate disasters. We want to register in this document to all parliamentarians to participate in the supervision of implementation of NDCs of all countries and to reach the plain implementation of the commitments that were agreed under the perspective of climate financing. We wanted to reinforce the needs of financing of climate actions, like, for example, the development banks starting to have leadership roles supporting low-emission economies and approaching the need to give voice to their governments, for the need to increase financing for climate transitions, and for the continuous reductions of pollution. Besides that, the document brings the need of a holistic alliance so that the parliaments can support in an intense way policies that defend climate and health care involving nutrition. And as legislators, we have a role in climate politics, and in this forum, we represent an important force of coercion that is able to offer to our societies a better life related to climate. We're rigorous to give central answers and policies for climate changes, leaving a legacy of progress. So we want to thank all the companions that are here today, and we wish a successful work. We celebrate our populations with a better climate. Thank you to all. From this moment on, we will hear the official pronouncement of Congressman Claudio Cajado as a member of the Executive Committee of IPU. Mr. Humberto Costa, my friend, greet Mr. Crispi, Executive Secretariat of the UN for Climate Changes. A special mention of the President of the Legislative Assembly, Congressman Chicão. Thank you for giving your facilities for this meeting. And I wanted to do a special mention of my colleague, Deputada Congresswoman Barbalho. In the name of all delegations, I send a big hug for your excellent welcoming that is being offered for us and this beautiful people from Pará. It's an honor to be here. The opening speech of the IPU in name of our President in the parliamentarian meeting of COP30. I wanted to start thanking you, parliamentarians from all regions in the world, for being here today with a common goal, transforming the promises in the Paris Agreement in tangible actions. This parliamentarian meeting it's an event for all national parliaments, and it's a meeting where parliamentarian voices from all over the world get together with one only main goal: accelerate the world's responses to climate changes. COP30 marks a decade since the Paris Treaty was signed. These past 10 years, we saw progress, notable. We saw progress. The prices of renewable energy went down, innovation accelerated, and public awareness increased. The global emissions continue increasing. Extreme climate events are increasing their frequency and intensity. Communities are being unrooted. The ecosystems are being destroyed, and inequalities are being deepened. We have science, we have technology. What the world needs now is political courage and accountability that only parliamentarians can offer. We're here because we know the power of parliaments. We have the capacity of transforming climate promises in reality through the policies and laws that we approved, the budgets that we approved, and the surveillance that we offer. Parliaments are the bridge between the global commitments and our local communities. We are the ones that translate the contributions that are determined nationally in legislations, budgets, and national supervisions. What makes the parliamentarians unique in this struggle is our direct connection with people. We represent agriculturists that go through droughts, coastal communities that lose their houses for the ocean, youngsters that want future, and workers' visible voice in the global climate process. Parliaments get together to share ideas, share experiences, and reaffirm our collective responsibility. Each year, we see that the climate ambition is growing between the parliaments all over the world. We see that parliamentarians are passing awareness to transforming words and laws. And this meeting gives us the opportunity to learn with each other, with our success, and also with our challenges and lessons learned. It gives us a space for an honest debate where many perspectives can get together in a spirit of collaboration. And it also reminds us that we can not agree sometimes related to politics, but we share the same goals. In a world that sometimes seems divided, the work of the IPU and meetings like these ones show the importance of dialogue and cooperation. Today, we're going to hear how parliaments are working to implement NDCs. How are they promoting adaptations for people that live in the front lines of climate changes? We're going to learn what measures parliaments are taking to deal with these powerful emissions of methane and that are making the climate events even more serious. And we need to guarantee that gender equality and health are on the center of climate answers. Dear colleagues, the next decade will decide the destiny of the Paris Treaty and maybe of humanity also. Here in Belém, we have the biggest tropical forest in the world, and this reminds us what's being disputed in our systems that sustain life. Let's make this moment worth it. IPU is ready to support you in this work through research and exchange of good parliamentarian practices that reinforce climate governance. Through our collective actions, we can make parliaments impulse and more effective in climate actions and also responsibility all over the world. Together, we're going to act with the urgency that science needs, the urgency that our citizens are hoping, and the unity that our planet needs desperately. Thank you to all, and a good meeting for us. So we close the opening session of this meeting. In a few moments, we will have the first session with the subject strengthening of parliamentarian leaderships for the fulfillment of NDCs. Ladies and gentlemen, we request that everybody takes their seats so we can start the first session. Ladies and gentlemen, we request everybody to take your seats so we can start our first session. Ladies and gentlemen, we request everybody to take your seats so we can start the first session. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start the first session of this meeting with the theme Strengthening of the Parliaments for Implementing the Contributions and internalized nationally. We invite the moderator of this panel and member of the Austria Department, Ms. Nega Akaparay, member of the delegation from Azerbaijan, Ms. Mariana Boshakova, judicial advisor in the program of the UN for the environment, Mr. Moses Kajwen, member of the Kenya Parliament. We informed that in each panel, participants of this meeting can take the floor, and for that we request that you do your subscription until the end of each session. With the floor to moderate this meeting, Mr. Lucas Hammer.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Distinguished delegates, colleagues and friends, welcome to our first thematic sessions of the parliamentary meeting at the COP30, which will focus, as you said, on strengthening parliamentary leadership for the realization of nationally determined contributions, or as we say, the NDCs. My name is Lucas Hammer. I come from a country in Europe, Austria, and there in the Parliament I chair the Environment Committee. I'm from the Green Party. This year, 2025, marks a milestone. We meet here today 10 years after the historic moment in Paris where we committed to a common goal. A goal that is essential to preventing the most dangerous climate tipping points. Since then, the scientific evidence underlying the urgency of this goal has only grown stronger. And we are already witnessing the consequences of the climate crisis. And they're arriving earlier and are hitting harder than many predicted. 10 years ago in Paris, we made a promise to future generations. We made a promise to our children that we would hand over a planet that is still capable of sustaining a good life, where a good life, living a good life is still possible. But we have to be honest here. As things stand now, nós vamos
romper com essa promessa.
Sim,
nós fizemos progresso nos últimos 10 anos, mas não o suficiente. Com as políticas atuais, estamos em direção ao mundo que será 2,8 graus mais quente e não 1,5 graus, que foi a nossa promessa. Precisamos reconhecer que as nossas NDCs ainda não são suficientes. Muitos países nem submeteram as suas NDCs. Outros criaram metas que são menores. E talvez mais importante, as nossas políticas de verdade e ações não combinam o que nós colocamos no papel. Endereçando tudo isso requer trabalho substancial de cada um de nós nos nossos parlamentos. Isso
This
é
is why
porque
we're here
estamos aqui
today,
hoje, para
to
discutir
discuss
como
how we can
podemos
phase out fossil fuels,
parar de usar
to protect
combustíveis
and regrow our
fósseis, proteger as
forests, to protect
florestas,
our communities, our indigenous and local communities, and to transform our economies. And I'm looking forward to the contributions and to learning from one another. It's now my pleasure to introduce the distinguished panelists. I start on the far left, from my perspective, with Ms. Nigar Arpadaray. She's a member of the Milli Majlis of the Azerbaijan and served as the COP29 high-level climate champion. She has been at the forefront of mobilizing global stakeholders to accelerate action under the Paris Agreement and brings a unique perspective on how parliaments can bridge international commitments with domestic action. Thank you, they're here. Let me introduce first the other panelists. I know that you have to leave earlier, but you will be the first one to speak. On my right is Ms. Mariana Bolshakova. She's a legal advisor at the United Nations Environment Program, and she has extensive experience supporting governments in aligning legal frameworks with local environmental goals. Hello. And to my left, my old friend Moses Kajwang is a member of the Senate of Kenya. He is a strong advocate for climate accountability and community-based environment governments. Good that you're here again. I would now like to hand it over to our panelists to briefly hear their perspective and on how parliaments can deliver on NDCs. So we will hear our three panelists, and then we go afterwards in a brief discussions, and I give the floor now to you, Ms. Arpadaray, for 5 minutes, and I know that you have to leave earlier, so because you have an important meeting afterwards. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Bom dia, dear friends. It's great to be here in Brazil, in the heart of Amazonia, the lungs of Mother Earth, and being here, you can see that the nature is alive and the forests are talking to you. So this gives us a feeling of what we are fighting for, and that's the worth fighting for. Dear friends, I represent COP29 presidency and also Milli Majlis Parliament of Azerbaijan. And it was great to welcome all of you in Baku last year. I would like just to give you a bit of information what was the outcomes of COP29. As you remember, the main idea and the main subject was the NCQG, the climate finance, because all the commitments and the green transition requires means of implementation, which is mainly the finance. So, and as the high-level champion, I kept hearing it from different parts of the world, from people that we met, and that finance is required. So I'm happy to say that Azerbaijan and COP29 came with, under Azerbaijan's mediation, COP29 came with remarkable historic outcomes on NCQG, on 300 billion by 20 to the developing world, and also there were the operationalization of the loss and damage fund and Article 6. So COP29 will be remembered as one of the most impactful COPs. That's how I feel it. And dear friends, now we are discussing the subject of NDCs, which is extremely important because NDCs, it's not just the climate documents. They are the national development strategies for a safer, fairer, and more resilient world. And well-designed climate policy attracts investment, drives innovation, and creates long-term economic resilience. Nations that lead with bold, credible NDCs will not only reduce emissions, they will also unlock stronger growth, greater energy security, and new avenues for industrial competitiveness. And being high-level champion, my role was to engage with non-state actor community mainly. This is the private sector, civil society, academia, and in many cases what we heard from the private sector was that we are ready to have ambitious MDCs, we are ready to support the government in that, but we want a better dialogue with that. So investing in adaptation and resilience is equally essential. It protects economies from climate shocks, safeguards food and water systems, and strengthens the infrastructure communities depend on. From climate-smart agriculture to resilient cities and early warning systems, these are not just optional luxuries. They are foundation to sustainable national development. But ambition alone is not enough. The latest UN report shows what is now shifting and how NDCs are being developed and implemented from non-party stakeholders such as businesses, investors, subnational governments, civil society and academia, increasingly embedded in the process. Nearly 90% of NDCs reference engagement with non-state actors, and up to 80% integrate cities, states and regions as delivery partners. This is the essence of the whole of society approach, one that moves up from individual action to collective acceleration. 92% of parties cite roles for businesses in implementation, and 3/4 highlights the importance of private finance mobilization. And Azerbaijan last week has also submitted its renewed NDCs, showing the advancement of Azerbaijan's previous 2050 emissions reduction target by 15 years, committing to 40% reduction by 2035. To support governments and legislators on the critical task, the climate high-level champions have consolidated insights, priorities, and offers to support of non-state actors in a number of reports and convergence. So our message is clear to non-state actor community here. We need to bring solutions, investments, and innovation. The leadership of non-state actor community gives governments the confidence to raise ambition and deliver transformations we need. Parliamentarians and legislative leaders. The role of parliamentarians is indispensable. We can ensure NDCs are not only ambitious, but actionable. This is what we need to do. We need to be actionable and also realistic. So that's clearly what we need to deliver, because parliamentarians are taking feedbacks from their communities as well. They know how people feel. And also, we need to make sure NDCs are backed with budgets implemented across ministries and informed by the voices of youth, indigenous peoples and local communities. By embedding inclusive whole-of-society frameworks into national processes, we can ensure that climate action becomes both durable, just and realistic. Let us seize the opportunity, not simply to meet our NDCs, but to make them instruments of shared prosperity and lasting hope. Dear colleagues, I would also like to inform you that as COP29, as I mentioned, our main achievement and the outcome of 300 billion USD. This is the figure which was tripled from 100 billion. But COP29 presidency was working very closely with COP30 presidency to scale it up to 1.3 trillion. And we came up with Baku to Belém roadmap, which is also announced. It's the recommendation on how the finance can be scaled it up, because we know that green transition requires trillions. And here in this document, we have private sector, we have public-private, and also philanthropic funds, which is also mentioned there. So thank you so much for being here, and we are looking forward for the great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, dear colleague, and thanks a lot for sticking to your 5 minutes exactly. Our next intervention comes from Ms. Mariana Bolshakova. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, and good morning. Good morning, everybody. I would like to, first of all, thank the Parliament of Brazil and the Interparliamentary Union for organizing this very important meeting. And also for inviting us as UNEP to speak to you. NDCs are the main vehicle through which we can collectively address one of the biggest humanities challenges of current time. So you will hear, if you are participating in the negotiations, there is a lot about the nationally determined nature of NDCs, and that is, of course, a very, very important feature of them. But it is also a contribution. It is a contribution that each of our countries makes to the common effort to address the problem. So while it is nationally determined, it is also really important that the NDCs be as ambitious as possible. And that is an obligation that we have undertaken, each of our countries that are parties to the Paris Agreement have undertaken under the agreement. So as ambitious as possible. They also need to be implementable, they need to be realistic, they need to have feet on the ground. They need to be supported by legislation and policy. They cannot just stand on their own as a piece of paper that is sent to the Secretariat of the UNFCCC. They need to be designed collectively by all those who will be implementing them, by domestic stakeholders such as local communities, indigenous peoples, youth, vulnerable communities, and the private sector, and the previous speaker has already alluded to that. And they need to be designed in such a way that they support economic and social development in our countries. So you as legislators have a crucial role in the development, in the implementation, and in the continuous strengthening of ambition in each progressive nationally determined contribution. And I want to stop on three specific points or three specific roles that I think are key for parliamentarians in this respect. The first one is the actual development and revision of NDCs. The next one is the legislative underpinning. And finally, it's the underpinning through resources. So to start with, of course, the NDCs have been submitted when parties have joined the Paris Agreement. We are now in the year of strengthening ambition of submitting the revised NDCs. I have looked recently, a couple of days ago, and I think we've got now around 108 out of 195 NDCs that are due to be submitted this year, revised NDCs, that address roughly 70% of global emissions, so those countries that have submitted their nationally determined contributions this year. So it is a good trend. We're well underway, but clearly not quite yet there. So there's still quite a number of countries that are in the process of revising and need to do that hopefully in the next month or so. So as parliamentarians, there is a very important role because these are obligations. The obligation to develop and update an NDC is part of what you have ratified through ratification in parliaments of the Paris Agreement. So parliamentary oversight over how the NDCs are updated, when they are submitted, the timeliness of their submission, and also the level of ambition in those NDCs is one of the crucial roles that you play at the national level. The other aspect is, of course, the NDCs are only as good as they can be implemented in reality on the ground once they are developed and submitted. And that is your key role, your key usual role on a daily basis, that is the development of legislation, development of policies, and the necessary institutional arrangements at the national level that make these NDCs realistic and they make them implementable. And here we at UNEP have looked at sort of the global trends in how environmental legislation in general is implemented. And what we found, and we've done this sort of comprehensive assessment through the environmental rule of law periodic reports. And what we found is that there is a very significant gap in both developed and developing countries between the requirements of environmental legislation and their actual implementation and enforcement. And a big problem there is the lack of regulations and standards. So the laws are proclaimed, they are adopted, but the actual regulations and standards that make them implementable are often lacking. So that, again, the parliamentary oversight in that respect is a very crucial role that you play. And then finally, something that is very important is all these NDCs are a moot point if they're not underpinned by resources. And parliamentarians here have also a fundamental role. One mechanism is the alignment of public finance, that is a reorientation of government spending towards something that supports what is in the NDCs, what is in the national adaptation plans. The other one is the reform of fossil fuel subsidies, because you control how public finance is allocated, and it is a choice that, of course, always for you takes into account domestic priorities, but in the long term, fossil fuel subsidies make national economies less sustainable and also more vulnerable to external factors. So looking at, in the long term, how fossil fuel subsidies can be phased out and replaced with more sustainable financing is really important. The other two things that I wanted to mention here is looking at the market-based policies and seeing how things like carbon taxings and also cap and trade systems could be implemented at the national level, and the creative legislative foundation for green procurement. So these are some of the aspects that I would very much encourage you to look at. I think I'm going to wrap up here, but very happy to answer any further questions.
Thanks a lot, Mariana, for this very interesting intervention and reminding us what our role is. I think you also mentioned it, but I might add that our role is also to hold our governments accountable and to put pressure on them if they are not delivering, both on national but also on international level, because our governments have a legislative role on international level in a certain way, but we as parliamentarians, at least in most parliaments, control government and can make them accountable. And I think that's a also very important role, just in addition to what you just said. But thanks a lot. I will now move on to our third panelist. Please, Moses, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lucas. First of all, receive compliments from the speakers of the two houses of parliament in Kenya. And Lucas, it's good to see you. Last year we were together in Baku. And I believe we are speaking to politicians. And things change so fast because last year you were in government, today you are in the opposition. And that then tells us that as politicians, we've got a very powerful voice when it comes to implementation of climate plans in our respective countries. The first two speakers have given the impression that members of parliament tend to be involved in development of NDCs. In my experience, and from the context that I come from, the nationally determined contributions tend to be an executive decision. I don't know whether there's a member of parliament here who has ever been involved, who has ever been put down by the executive to agree that these are the targets. I have made the argument previously that if the Paris Agreement is a treaty that has been ratified by our respective parliaments, then any other instrument within that treaty should be looked at as statutory instruments subject to parliamentary ratification. And I have argued before that even NDCs should be brought back to Parliament for consideration and to ensure that they align with overall national priorities. We have seen recent examples of political development where the political persuasion of one group of politicians can completely reset a country's well-thought-out climate plans and nationally determined contribution. We have seen instances where change in political leadership moves a country from hope and optimism to skepticism and cynicism. And so when we come to the conferences of parties, the trend has been that members of parliament retreat in a separate location while the technocrats and the executive sit in the blue zone. And I hope that progressively we'll find a situation where we all sit together so that we align our thoughts and we also align our perspectives politically and technically. The role of members of parliament ideally really is to establish a sound legal framework for implementation of the NDCs. And a number of countries have come up with climate change laws, and my colleague has also talked about regulations to ensure proper functioning of those laws. Of course, policies come to Parliament as sessional papers in certain jurisdictions, but we need to see the executive and technocrats bringing the nationally determined contributions to Parliament. Parliamentarians also have a special role in terms of allocation of budgets. Means of implementation is a big phrase when it comes to the climate space. The question has been, are we able to finance climate adaptation and mitigation measures from domestic budgets? And the answer is that the threat and the damage to the environment and to climate that has been visited upon fairly small and vulnerable countries by the big prosperous countries is too huge to be borne by domestic budgets. Nonetheless, a few countries have gone ahead and set up climate change funds. In my country, we have established a climate change fund where we try to ring fence and put together all sources, be they domestic, be they from grants, be they from concessional sources, to ensure that climate financing in terms of fundraising and in terms of expenditure can be ring-fenced and can be easily tracked. However, as parliamentarians, we must also continue to pile pressure on the global agenda for realization of some of the funds that have already been agreed upon. When we were in Baku, there was the Loss and Damage Fund, and I'm happy that the modalities for drawing on the Loss and Damage Fund have started being defined. They've started being clarified. And I hope that by the time we get to the next COP, there will be some success stories of countries that have been able to draw from that fund. I want to provide a specific example where Parliament is able to draw on some of these funds, particularly the Green Climate Fund. In Africa, about 15 countries are participating in a program called Parliamentarians for Climate Finance. Now, you may know that the Green Climate Fund has a readiness facility for members of Parliament. In the specific case of Kenya, we've been able to draw $1 million to build the capacity of members of Parliament to be able to understand the concepts and the issues around climate change. And I think that has been extremely useful because it has created a team of champions in Parliament such that it does not matter who the president is going to be. You might get a president who's a climate skeptic, but you've got an army, a huge team of members of Parliament who understand the science and who understand the concern around this issue. Let me just conclude my 5 minutes by saying that climate finance in most of the developing countries has been coming in as loans and have been coming in at rates that I would call Shylock rates because of what we are calling, the risk profile when it comes to the credit rating. So we need to look at climate finance slightly differently so that more of it comes in form of grants rather than as concessional finance. The future, as defined by politicians, tends to be different as defined by other people. For the politicians in the room, the future is the next election. Yet, the future should be the next generation. And unfortunately, for many politicians, you cannot determine that future. Thankfully, in my country, we have put the date of the next election in the Constitution. But I know for some of us, it depends on which side of the bed the Prime Minister or President wakes up on. So it's very difficult to determine the future. But I believe for us to ensure that we give a fit inheritance to our children and their children, we must redefine the future from beyond the next election to the next generation. Thank you, Lucas.
Thanks, Moses. You're not only a strong climate advocate, but you're really a role model of a self-confident and proud parliamentarian, and really leading the way on, what our role can and should be in a time where, and I think in most of our parliaments we experience the same, that our parliaments, our political zone, our public is flooded by, fake news, by so-called alternative facts, telling us that it is all a hoax and that the whole thing with climate crisis is not true. What I tell my fellow parliamentarians who do not believe in the climate crisis back in Austria and Europe, that they should come here and talk to our dear colleagues here in the room who are from frontline countries. And I think meetings like these and exchanges like these might change their views, because you really get a reality check if you're talking to colleagues that tell you what the realities back home is. So thanks a lot, and thanks also to Marianne for your intervention. I will now open the floor for your interventions. Please remember that your intervention should be short and concise, so please, not more than 2 minutes. I really ask you to keep that limit, because you want to give other colleagues in this room the possibility to participate in these discussions. If you would like to speak, please ensure that you have submitted a request to take the floor from the IPU Secretariat. Back there, I have 6 requests already. If we have time, I would take more afterwards. So the floor is open now, and the first the first intervention comes from China, Mr. Xinje Lu. The floor is yours.
主席先生，各位同事，感谢各国议联和东道主巴西会所做的周到安排。我很高兴与大家就议会在国家自主贡献中的作用进行交流探讨。中国落实
Excuse me?
2030
Sorry. Do we get a translation? No. I asked the IPU Secretary, do we have a... Just checking. Because we, if you understand me, we do want to understand what you're saying, and at least I don't have a translation.
Well, actually,
we take a sec. You can make
yes,
the intervention in English?
Yes, because actually we prepared the simultaneous interpretation, but now I can do it consecutively. It's okay.
Or shall we wait? So we do the next intervention, then I hope the simultaneous translation is ready. We just have to wait a couple of minutes, and I take Italy first, and then the simultaneous translation should be ready. So I ask Ms. Chiara Braga from Italy to take the floor.
Grazie al Presidente della conferenza. Cari colleghi, cari colleghe, miliardi di donne e di uomini, pure nei tempi difficili che viviamo, non possono perdere la sfida del cambiamento climatico. La transizione giusta per l'ambiente e le comunità è una condizione necessaria e non più una promessa per i popoli del pianeta. Cercare progressi coordinati nel miglioramento delle condizioni di vita e della governance climatica, promuovendo uno sviluppo di alta qualità per offrire maggiori benefici alle popolazioni di tutti i paesi. Questa è la missione che investe soprattutto la responsabilità dei parlamenti e di noi che oggi siamo qui.
Coordinated advances related to the climate cooperation. COP30 should be a step of negotiation, but the real proof bank for the whole system of climate diplomacy. After years that many ambitious objectives are in the agenda here in Belém, and the green lung of the planet that is the Amazon, we need to show that we're not in a promise stage, but we need concrete actions. We need to respect the principle of common responsibilities according to all possibilities, implementing the Convention about Climate Changes and the Paris Treaty. We want to sustain equity
e i paesi sviluppati devono
And
assumere un ruolo solidale di
countries that aren't
accompagnamento
involved need to have
nell'adempiere agli
a
obblighi di
solid
riduzione delle
role
emissioni,
in the fulfillment of the reduction of emissions, and they need to respect
gli impegni
the
finanziari
financial
e dare
commitments
sostegno
and
tecnologico
provide more
e capacity
technological
building ai
support
paesi più fragili.
and training
La sfida
for the more
dell'adattamento è centrale
fragile
anche in Italia
countries.
e in Europa.
We know that the
Servono
challenge
risorse
of adaptation is
politiche
central in
integranti che coinvolgano
Europe.
città
We
e
need
territori.
political resources
Sappiamo bene che buona
that
parte dei
integrate
negoziati
cities
sta
and
concentrando
territories. We
sulla
know that good
finanza
part
per
of the
il clima, non
negotiations
più
is
solo
concentrated on the
impegno di
financing for
sfruttare
climate
risorse,
and
ma domanda di
commitment
trasparenza
for
sulle voci
using
di spesa,
resources,
di
but
strumenti
we
e
need
risultati
transparency
verificabili e
and
misurabili dai parlamenti.
public budgets, and we need to
Infine,
have
colleghi, la giustizia
measurable
climatica.
results.
La
And
COP30
finally,
non può
climate
limitarsi a
justice,
negoziare tra governi, ma la
COP30
presenza
can't just be limited to
importantissima,
negotiate
necessaria, che
between
abbiamo
governments,
applaudito
but it's
con gioia
important
delle
for
popolazioni
us to
indigene di
applause,
tante comunità
give a
locali
round
così
of
minacciate
applause
dal
for all
clima,
the indigenous
deve sentire da
communities that are
subito la
threatened
loro
by the climate
partecipazione alle
changes.
decisioni,
And
perché
we need
sappiamo
to
che da qui
allow
passa
their
benessere,
participation
salute dei
in
cittadini
our
e condizioni per
decisions,
combattere le
because
disuguaglianze di
they
genere.
need to have
In un mondo segnato
health
da
care,
guerre,
and
ingiustizie e divisioni,
we need more
la
gender
battaglia
equality.
per la crisi
In a world that is
climatica è al
marked by
contempo
war,
una scelta
the
di
struggle
pace.
against climate
Costruire un
changes
futuro
is a
sostenibile
peace
significa costruire un
choice.
futuro più giusto e sicuro per
Building
tutti.
a sustainable future means building a
Mille grazie.
more fair future for everybody. Thank you so much.
So I was informed that we don't have simultaneous translation in Chinese, so maybe if you could translate in English. So the floor is yours, please. Okay. And sorry for that.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, please allow me to begin by extending my appreciation to the IPU and our host, the Brazilian Parliament, for their thoughtful arrangements. I'm pleased to join you in discussions on the role of the Parliament in implementing the NDCs. China has made notable achievements in implementing its 2030 NDCs, and we have exceeded our targets on the installed capacity of solar and wind power and the forest stock volume. In September this year, President Xi announced China's 2035 NDC covering all economic sectors and all greenhouse gases. This is the first time that China put forward an absolute emissions reduction target, which is a testament to China's firm resolve and maximum effort. To implement the 2035 NDC targets, China will intensify efforts to improve its climate change policy and institutional framework, promote green, low-carbon, and high-quality development, establish a new energy system to facilitate energy transition, and advance the development of the market mechanisms and climate investment and financing. The National People's Congress of China has consistently prioritized the legislation and law enforcement supervision on climate. More than 30 laws on environmental protection have been enacted, and a resolution specifically on actively tackling climate change has been adopted. The current NPC has already formulated the energy law with efforts underway to revise the renewable energy law and electricity law. The Environmental Code currently under deliberation has a dedicated chapter on climate, making more systematic and comprehensive provisions for green and low carbon development and climate response. The NPC has also advanced the effective enforcement of the laws through law enforcement inspections, hearing of reports, and thematic investigations. 10 years ago, we had the Paris Agreement, and 10 years on here today, the National People's Congress of China is keen to further increase cooperation with parliaments all over the world to advance the establishment of a fair, reasonable, and win-win global climate governance system. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that intervention, and also thanks for your flexibility that we can do it that way. Next on the list is Japan, Mr. Shinji Takoichi.
議員よろしくお願いいたします。
ご発言の機会をいただきありがとうございます。日本国会代表団の竹内団長しております竹内慎と申します。
Japan submitted its new NDCs to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Secretariat in February this year, and at the same time revised the Basic Energy Plan and the Global Warming Prevention Plan to underpin it. Domestically, Japan has been promoting its green transportation GX policy, which aims to simultaneously achieve stable energy supply, economic growth, and emissions reduction. The construction of some renewable energy facilities, such as solar and wind power, has become an issue, and we are now at a stage where urgent action is needed to combat climate change. We will closely monitor the government's efforts on the GX policy from the parliamentary perspective, taking a medium and long-term view. The circular economy is indispensable to achieve net zero, nature positive, and solving environmental issues such as reducing pollution. However, international frameworks for evaluation methodology of the circular economy, including indices, and for information disclosure of non-financial information of companies have not yet been established. It is necessary to promote disclosure by businesses of the proportions of recycled plastic and metal materials used at the time of production and use them as indices. Climate change is an urgent issue affecting all of humanity across borders. We firmly believe that utilizing the bilateral credit system, JCM, which is the international cooperation framework established under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, will significantly contribute to global emissions reduction, sustainable development, and the achievement of NDCs for both Japan and its partner countries. I would like to hear the various views on expanding the potential of the bilateral credit system and deepening collaboration to realize a sustainable future. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you. Thank you for your intervention, and maybe the question is noted. Next on the list is the colleague from Cambodia, Mr. Champal Ngi. Sorry for the horrible pronunciation.
Well, thank you very much, and distinguished delegate, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Cambodian Parliament delegation, I am honored to contribute to this timely and urgent discussion on the impact of global warming, especially its disproportionate effect on the world's most vulnerable community. Cambodia is on the front line of climate change. Climate change in Cambodia is not a distant threat. It is a daily reality, and those with the least capacity to adapt are paying the higher price. The Parliament of Cambodia recognizes its vital role in advancing climate justice and safeguarding the rights of vulnerable population. Our parliamentary action included integrated climate resilience into the national legislation, such as land, water management, and disaster risk reduction policy. We also support Cambodia update NDC under the Paris Agreement, which include ambitious target for renewable energy, reforestation, and low carbon agriculture. Despite contributing less than 1% to global emissions, Cambodia has demonstrated leadership in climate governance by submitting its inclusive set nationally determined contribution NDC in early August 2025, at aiming to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. We also advocating for climate financing mechanisms that are accessible to the and directly benefit affected community, and also ensuring inclusive public, particularly by empowering youth, women, and indigenous people group to shape local climate solutions. I urge our fellow parliamentarians to support their government in these essential efforts, actively monitor progress, advocate for transparencies, and seek equitable solutions. With that being said, Cambodia is proud to endorse the final draft outcome document which articulates our collective aspiration and urgent call for action. Cambodia stands ready to collaborate with all members of parliament to fulfill our commitment and address the inequality that climate change exacerbated. Together, through the adoption of this outcome document, we can forge a sustainable and resilient future for all. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Next one is our colleague from Mozambique, Mr. Manuel Ramesani. The floor is yours. Please try to stick to the 2 minutes.
Por favor, tente ficar dentro de 2 minutos.
Obrigado. Obrigado pela concessão da palavra. Começo
by thanking in the name of the Presidency of the Republic Assembly of Mozambique, greeting all here in the Parliament in this parliamentarian meeting organized during COP30. The topic of the session, it's with no doubt a call to action in a time where climate change threaten the basis of human development. The parliaments cannot be mere observers. They should be protagonists in the political definitions, in the approval of legislation, and the oversight of their implementation, guaranteeing that the international commitment would be translated in concrete benefits to our peoples. The Mozambican Parliament has reaffirmed its determination to align the legislative production with the goals of the Paris Agreement and with the contributions with the NDCs presented by the government. We recognize that no country can face alone this global crisis. Therefore, we defend the reinforcement of interparliamentarian cooperation, the sharing of best practices, legislative best practices, and the creation of regional mechanisms of green financing. The Parliament should have a proactive leadership guaranteeing that the climate policies are integrated in all sectors, such as energy, agriculture, transportation, territorial organization, and environmental education. And more than that, we should ensure that the climatic solutions are just, centered on people valuing the role of local communities, women, youth in the building of a resilient economy and green economy. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Last but not least on my list is our colleague from Greece, Mr. Anastasios Athanasios, excuse me, Papantasis, παρακαλώ.
Athanasios Papathanasios. It's a difficult one. Distinguished colleagues, it's an honor to address you today at a decisive moment in our shared efforts to confront the climate crisis. Around the world, the impacts of climate change are shaping our economies, our infrastructures, our health systems, and most importantly, the daily lives of our citizens. Adaptation is the foundation upon which the safety, resilience, and dignity of our societies will depend in the decades to come. In Greece, we have witnessed devastating wildfires, floods, coastal erosion, and pressure on agricultural land and water resources. These challenges have compelled us to act faster, more collaboratively, and with a clear sense of responsibility. Parliaments have a central role in delivering. First, legislation with resilience at its core. We must ensure that every major public investment, energy system, water project, and agricultural strategy integrates climate risk and climate resilience. Second, oversight and accountability. Political ambition must be matched with transparent implementation. Third, empowering local authorities. Adaptation is implemented locally in cities, coastal communities, river basins, forests, and farmland. Local governments need access to resources, technical expertise, and coordination frameworks. But let us clear, our objective is not merely a green transition. Our objective is a fair, secure, and socially inclusive transition. As parliamentarians, we are the bridge between global commitments and everyday reality. Let us ensure that resilience is not a slogan, but a lived reality for all our citizens. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So I take 2 or 3 other interventions, and here the colleague from Brazil.
Bom dia a todos e a todas. Eu me chamo Maria do Carmo. Eu sou deputada
state congresswoman of the second term. I'm the president of the Environmental Committee of the Legislative Assembly. I used to be the mayor of the second biggest city of our state after Belém, which is Santarém. Many of you might have heard Terra do Chão, which is our river beach. I invite you all to go and visit. I greet all that are here, and my contribution, it goes in 2 directions. The first one is the all COPs established goals and financing, and it wasn't different in Paris, and we are now demanding. I think that as a contribution that us parliamentarians, we need to act on 2 fronts, especially the federal legislator, to help our countries to keep up with their commitments, and we help when we legislate so that they can keep up with the commitments. And besides legislating along these lines, we should also create mechanisms, oversight mechanisms, so that these actions, needed actions to reach the goals, are done by our countries. In second place, the funding and the financing that come to Brazil don't reach the Amazon because they go to the BNDES, which is a Federal Development Bank, and they should come into the Amazon Bank, BASA, or a development agency of the Amazon. It doesn't come. This resource stays at the BNDES, and a work group, they don't even know the Amazon. They decide where the funds should go to, and they place in the hands of foreign NGOs to come here to realize actions, and they don't have the knowledge where this resource should be in the hands of the territories of the Quilombolas, the riverside people, and our indigenous people, because they are the Amazon guardians throughout the last centuries, and they, more than any one of us, they know what to do to keep up the Amazon standing, and the people that are hardworking people, they are free under the trees, because in the Amazon there are millions of people that need to live and live well, and the Amazon has suffered many environmental disasters, and the world doesn't know. We have extreme droughts. We are close to having deserted areas, desert in the Amazon, and we don't have public policies to avoid this, because when you see in the system, it goes to the northeast, and then they have policies, anti-desertification policies, because it's a semi-arid and dry area. But we have disasters in the Amazon. We had fires, extreme fires. We lived through extreme drought periods, isolating people from the Amazon. But no one knows in the world. In the world, now Brazil is in the root of the great disasters. In the south and the southeast, we had floods, and 3 weeks ago, floods, and there was a tornado in Brazil that had never happened before. And now we're entering the list of world disasters because the south is the one being hit, and the south and southeast are the richest areas of our country. And the north and the northeast, where we are today, there are always serious disasters, but we have no voice. We don't have enough voice to reach the world. Now the world is hearing about the Amazon because they came here, thank God. So they are seeing what we're living. Extreme droughts, inundations, floods, desertification, semi-arid, isolation, and fires and deforestation. We need finances, we need funds to safeguard our territories. But when the rich countries, they give you investments, you have to monitor and oversee where the funds are going to all over the world, because it's needed that the resources arrive where the disasters are taking place and where the population is isolated. And it's here in the Amazon, PASA, a local bank, an Amazon bank, a federal bank, and for Sudan, which is a development agency. I'm going to leave here with you. I haven't translated to English, I'm sorry.
I know how to speak English, but I didn't ask them to write in English. Sorry for this. Isso aqui é da nossa Comissão de Meio Ambiente, são as nossas legislações aqui ambientais, já todas
legislation connected to the SDGs. They're all here. You can have a copy, if you can have it translated. You will find a way. Please bring a copy along with you and see how much we have advanced. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, dear colleague. That was a very emotional reality check, actually, for us. And that's part why we are here in the Amazon, to get, well, a reality check on many different issues, on the effects of the climate crisis here in the Amazon, but also on climate finance. And I think also for representatives from the global north, it's important that the climate finance ends up there where it should, because also we have to go to our constituency, and if the climate finance, the international finance, doesn't end up there where it's supposed to be, then we also get a problem. So I think we have we share that. We're running a little bit out of time with further interventions. If there is one or two very short questions to the podium, I see here one, then I would take them, and then I would ask for a final round. So yeah, we have 10 minutes left. So there is my colleague from Austria, Karina Reiter, please.
Yeah, I'll keep it short, hopefully, otherwise he will hit me probably. We heard before in the panel that NDCs are just as good as they are supplemented or implemented on the ground. Are there any best practice examples that you can maybe tell us, or some further information how you can see from an outside perspective into parliaments where we should further our ambitions? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there another question to the podium or a short intervention? If that's not the case, we go back to my colleagues at the podium, and I start with you, Maria.
Thank you very much, and also thank you very much for these really very, very interesting interventions. So a couple of points on the issue of, who is responsible for the NDCs. Yes, it is the prerogative of the executive, but you have the prerogative of the parliamentary oversight. You are the ones who have taken the obligations through ratifying the Paris Agreement. So it's your prerogative. It's also your responsibility to have that parliamentary oversight of what happens with the NDCs. On the question, and I apologize if I may have misunderstood the question from the distinguished member of parliament from Japan. I think you've raised the point about the credit system, and I've spent 10 years working with UNFCCC before, so for me when I hear credit it goes immediately to emission credits. And as you know, under the Paris Agreement we have what is called the Article 6 mechanisms, and Article 6.4, paragraph 4, sets up a mechanism that basically builds on the experience we had with the Kyoto Protocol, on the clean development mechanism, and it is the system for emissions trading and issuing emission credits through projects. This is a new mechanism. It has just become operational, so it will take a couple of years to set everything in place. But that is something that I think it's really important for parliamentarians to look at how to use these market-based mechanisms and how to develop the necessary legislation in the country to operationalize this. So very much encourage you to look at that and to look at the developments under the negotiations on Article 6 in UNFCCC. I think I want to highlight the point that the distinguished representative from Mozambique raised on the usefulness of the exchanges among parliamentarians from different countries. I think that's absolutely crucial, and of course I would not be from a UN agency if I didn't tell you what we can do for you. So at UNEP, what we do is we have a very long-standing partnership with the IPU, and we've actually engaged with some of the national parliaments on how to improve climate legislation in the countries. So that is something that we perhaps can offer and can look at to also some sort of regional platforms for parliamentarians. We also have something called the Montevideo program at UNEP, where we provide assistance to countries in developing legislation on the ground. So that request can be submitted to UNEP, and we would be in touch with the country to see how we can assist. We have something called the Climate Law Toolkit, which is an electronic tool to help you look at legislation that exists in other countries and sort of use it as models depending on what your specific legislative development needs are. So there is this Climate Law Toolkit that is available online. And then finally, on the question on the good NDCs, I don't think that I have the time now to kind of go into details, but there is something that exists that is called an NDC partnership that helps with the development and the tracking of trends in the NDCs. And that's available on the website, and I would encourage you to look at that because you will find a lot of information on specific practices with NDCs there. Thank you very much, and pleasure to be here.
Thanks a lot, and I give it to you, Moses.
Thank you. It's nice when you're talking to political leaders. And I do hope and pray that many of you will go ahead and become the prime ministers and presidents of your respective countries, because you're saying all the right things and you're making all the necessary commitments. Even though COP30 has been framed as the implementation COP, when you look at recent events in geopolitics, perhaps this should be framed as a commitment COP. Commitment that, even though there are some things that require sovereignty and unilateralism, but when it comes to climate matters, we must still go the multilateral way, and we must take a global approach to getting solutions to the climate crisis. The commitment that funding for climate action is not an act of charity. It is an obligation that is rooted in justice. And we have seen in many cases when we talk of the NCQG and scaling it up from 300 billion to 1.3 trillion, it is looked at from the perspective of justice, of charity. It is not charity, it is justice. A commitment that politics will not cloud science. Many of our global partners tell us about values, the values, justice, democracy, and all that. I believe science is also a value. You cannot elevate some values over the others. And so we need to make that commitment that will make decisions based on the best of science. And I don't think that there is any other body beside the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that can give us the right situation when it comes to global warming and the climate crisis. A commitment that in as much as our sovereignty and nationalistic needs are geared towards growth, justice, prosperity, and industrialization, all that can be done in a green manner. It is possible to grow through green growth. It is possible to industrialize through green industrialization. It's possible to have justice through green justice. And it's possible to have prosperity through green prosperity. Let us not elevate development at the expense of climate. And let me conclude also by perhaps, I don't know whether it could be premature, that we are in conversations with the IPU to host a conference on methane in Nairobi early next year. And I do hope that the plans will come through, and I'll be very happy to welcome all of you to join us in Nairobi next year for a conference on methane so that we can continue the conversation on our commitments. Thank you.
Thanks so much, both of you, and also to all of you for the really fruitful discussions and the input. I think you said it right. It's about justice and solidarity from my point of view, and also responsibility. And for the countries of the global north, also where I'm from, it's about historic responsibility and to take that on. And it's about freedom. There was historic event, the German court, constitutional court, ruled that about a German climate law, and basically what they said is that if we do not act now, we take freedom away from our children, from future generations. It's about their freedom to live a life, a decent life on a planet that still allows that. I think that's what we have to fight for in our parliaments, and I'm very happy about this meeting and this exchange, and also the powerful interventions of all of you. And let's keep working together that we fulfill the promise that we gave to future generations and to our children 10 years ago in Paris, and especially on the NDCs. And let's work on national level in our parliaments and on regional levels in the parliaments, that we really get the policies, the actions, the legislations, the budget that is needed to keep the Paris goals alive. Thanks a lot, and we close this session. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, in a few moments, we will start our second session with the subject, Improving Resilience, how Parliament can fulfill the adaptation proposal.
Senhoras e senhores, bom dia.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning.
Neste momento,
This moment we will start the second session with theme Improving Resilience, how parliaments can fulfill the proposal of adaptation. We informed that in each panel, the participants of this meeting can have the floor. For that, we request that you subscribe in the table that is inside the auditorium until the end of each session. To integrate this table, Ms. Alexandra Mekin, Project Manager of ZOE Environment Network and moderator of this panel. Ms. Ilse Brands-Keris, General Secretary of Human Rights of the UN. Ms. Claudia Rutt, Member of the German Parliament. And Mr. Inia Senuriatu, Member of the Fiji Parliament. With the floor, Ms. Alexandra Meki that will moderate this session.
All right. Hello, everybody. Hello, distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you all to the second thematic session today called Enhancing Resilience, How Can Parliaments Deliver on Adaptation? I'm coming from the organization ZOE Environment Network, which is part of the Adaptation at Altitude program. This is a program funded by the Swiss government working on climate adaptation and resilience in mountain areas. This is particularly important because we don't really think of mountain areas when you think of climate change. But of course, mountains are facing some of the clearest indications of climate change, with temperatures rising very rapidly, melting glaciers, natural hazards like floods and avalanches and landslides, and of course, many impacts on the communities who live there, who are often some of the most marginalized in the country. And this is a problem that affects most of the countries around the world. There are mountains pretty much everywhere. And so we're delighted to have a long-standing collaboration with the IPU, working on how parliamentarians can respond to these climate change impacts. And I'm very happy to be here today to have a wider discussion on adaptation with some of the parliamentarians with us today. And this is particularly important because as climate change is intensifying, the need for adaptation has never been greater. And this is not a problem for the future. This is a here and now problem. Because we have these rising temperatures, droughts, floods, and displacement, which are already impacting millions of people, threatening lives, livelihoods, and the realization of human rights. So adaptation is not only an environmental imperative, but it is also a human one. It demands inclusive governance, equity, and solidarity, which are all principles at the heart of parliamentary work. In this session today, we're going to be exploring how parliaments can strengthen adaptation efforts by integrating climate resilience into national planning, promoting equitable access to resources, and ensuring that local communities' voices are reflected in national policies. So allow me to introduce our panelists here today. Ms. Ilse Brands-Keris, who is the United Nations Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights. She'll be bringing deep expertise on the intersection of human rights and climate policy, and ensuring that adaptation measures protect and empower vulnerable communities. Then we'll hear from Ms. Claudia Roth, who is a member of the German Bundestag and former Minister of State for Culture and the Media. She's been a long-standing advocate for environmental sustainability in the face of climate change. And finally, from Mr. Inia Senuriatu, who is a member of parliament from Fiji, and the Minister for Rural, Maritime Development and Disaster Management. He has been a leading voice in Fiji's national climate change efforts and brings first-hand experience from one of the world's most climate-vulnerable nations. So I would now like to invite our panelists to share their reflections and give the floor to Ms. Brands-Keris, the UN Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights.
Thank you very much, Madam. Distinguished parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, it's my pleasure
to join this parliamentary meeting and share some reflections on how parliaments can deliver adaptation that benefits those most affected by climate change. The climate emergency is a wake-up call for more participatory and effective governance based on human rights. Human rights-based climate solutions can guide the world to a more sustainable future through key actions such as open civic space, budgets anchored in human rights, and a concerted push at the global level for effective global action and justice. The adverse effects of climate change, including natural disasters, are escalating faster than adaptation measures we need to resist them. Prevention is the best policy, and as the recent advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice makes clear, states' legal obligation to prevent significant harm to the environment is also a matter of human rights. For the countless people already experiencing the devastating impacts of climate change, adaptation, which refers to a wide range of measures to reduce vulnerability to climate change impacts, is key. When adaptation is insufficient, people lose access to housing, clean water, food, and health services. These are not luxuries or simply basic services. They are human rights enshrined in international law. Adaptation is not optional. It is an obligation under international agreements, including the Paris Agreement. The recognition by the General Assembly of the United Nations in 2022 that a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is a human right represented a landmark achievement, which empowers all people by providing a critical tool to hold their governments, big polluters, and all those responsible for environmental harm to account. This right must guide adaptation efforts. This means protecting ecosystems that sustain livelihoods, reducing inequalities, and ensuring that adaptation strategies do not leave anyone behind. It also means adopting a human rights-based approach to the development, implementation, and monitoring of climate adaptation plans. Ultimately, integrating human rights into adaptation efforts will strengthen the legitimacy and sustainability of adaptation actions by centering on people's dignity and agency. Further, the priorities of the global goal on adaptation, such as the protection of ecosystems and livelihoods and preservation of cultural heritage, correspond to the human rights obligations that should guide just transition. Adaptation must address the social dimensions of climate risk exposure, particularly for marginalized and disadvantaged groups. Embedding human rights into adaptation indicators supports the development of policies and actions that are aligned with international human rights standards. At the national level, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has supported dedicated efforts by states to make adaptation goals more ambitious and aligned with environmental agreements and human rights standards. A notable example is Panama's recently launched Nature Pledge, for which OHCHR provided technical assistance, and we stand ready to support states in these efforts. The initiative integrates adaptation within global targets on climate mitigation, biodiversity restoration, and the fight against desertification, including multiple references to human rights and the protection of vulnerable groups, serving as an example for how ambition, cooperation, and a human rights-based approach can come together into environmental action. COP30 is a critical time for parties to agree on a monitoring framework that will support informed, transparent, accountable, and participatory decision-making on adaptation, including with respect to the rights of those in vulnerable situations. If a decision is not reached on the monitoring framework now, it might become too late to have meaningful data by 2030. The global goal on adaptation provides a framework for ambitious action. Parliaments are uniquely positioned to make adaptation human rights-based. Through legislation, by embedding adaptation into climate laws with explicit human rights safeguards. Through budget oversight, ensuring resources for adaptation are allotted equitably and the communities and people most affected by climate change prioritized. Through accountability, by monitoring implementation, demanding transparency in adaptation spending, and establishing access to remedy mechanisms in case of human rights violations. And finally, through participation, by guaranteeing that constituents, especially those people and groups in vulnerable situations, are meaningfully included to shape adaptation policies. As parliamentarians, your role in legislating and in shaping, framing, and overseeing policy implementation is crucial. I urge you to use your platforms to pursue effective, urgently needed, human rights-based climate action. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very interesting intervention. I think that it is very important to highlight this nexus between climate change and inequalities and human rights violations. And as we know, if we don't properly respond and adapt to these climate change impacts, these inequalities will be further exacerbated and there will only be further challenges in addressing them in the future. So this is a very insightful point. And I would now like to invite our second panelist, Ms. Claudia Roth of the German Bundestag, to share with us too. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, dear friends, dear colleagues, when we talk about adaptation, we are talking about survival. In Zambia, where I traveled just 2 weeks ago, the climate crisis is not a distant threat, it is a national emergency. The worst drought in more than 2 decades has turned fields into dust, rivers into dry beds, and hope into fear. I met mothers who showed me empty granaries and children suffering from malnutrition because the rain never came. That is what adaptation means. Fighting hunger when people lose their crops, fighting for water when wells run dry, and fighting for dignity when entire communities lose the basis of their existence. When I was in Kenya too, I could see the effects of climate change everywhere. Thousands of animals perished and more people become internally displaced. Yet Kenya shows what is possible today. More than 90% of its new electricity comes from renewable energy. It proves that when a country invests in adaptation and transformation at the same time, it can turn crisis into opportunity, into a sustainable future. During my visits to Bangladesh, to Kiribati, to Fiji, I saw what a rising sea can do. In Bangladesh, in the city of Khulna, I met women who had lost everything, their houses, their farmland to salt water. With incredible determination, they began again, raising goats through a small project supported by German cooperation. In Kiribati, the highest point of the main atoll is just 3 meters above the sea. People there now live between land and ocean, waiting for the next king tide. The hell on earth, believe me. And in Fiji, I met fishermen whose entire village had to be relocated because the ocean claimed their homes. They call their new settlement the Village of Hope. These encounters remind me that adaptation is not a technical concept. It is about justice, about human rights, and the right to a livable future. And I'm convinced that we as parliaments have a duty to turn this awareness into law, policy, and solidarity. First, accountability. All over the world, people are turning to the courts to defend their right to a safe climate, from the mountains of Peru to the islands of the Pacific. Just this year, the International Court of Justice issued its first ever advisory opinion on states' obligations under international law to protect the climate. It was initiated by students from Vanuatu whose homeland is literally disappearing into the ocean. A powerful example of young people forcing the world's highest court to define what climate justice means. And in Peru, it was the farmer Sao Luciano Lulia took the German energy company to court. Although he lost the case, the judges confirmed that major emitters can in principle be held responsible for their share of global emissions. That is historic, because it recognizes that climate damage has those responsible and that justice requires that polluters pay. We see similar actions, many in my home country. In Germany, we see so-called Zukunftsklagen, means future lawsuits with Germany's federal constitutional court. And in short, it means inaction today limits freedom tomorrow. Second, investment in resilience. Adaptation is not a cost, it is an investment in life. We need to strengthen partnerships that bring clean energy, water systems and climate-smart agriculture to those who need them most. At COP30 here in Belém, we are discussing how to measure adaptation progress. But we also need real financing, not just indicators. Developing countries need more than $310 billion a year for adaptation. Yet last year, only 26 billion were delivered. This gap must be closed. The newly launched Tropical Forest Forever facility here in Brazil is a sign of hope, paying countries and indigenous people directly for protecting tropical forests. Third, protection for climate displaced people. Already more than 40 million people have been forced to move because of the climate crisis. We need, and we have to do a lot for it in the parliaments, we need new international instruments, from climate visas to a climate passport, to ensure protection for those who lose not only their homes, but even their countries. Climate justice is not a question of charity. It is a question of fairness and of responsibility. Those who have contributed the least to the climate crisis are suffering the most from its consequences, like the fishermen in Fiji. As industrialized nations, we bear a historical responsibility. We must lead by example through ambition at home and solidarity abroad. And there, what was already said, I'm convinced that there is no climate justice without human rights, without protecting women, children, and indigenous people who are often the most affected and yet the least heard. We cannot stop every drought, nor prevent every flood, but we can prevent indifference. Let us make our parliaments places of empathy, places of action, where human suffering is translated into policy and justice. Because adaptation is not about survival alone. It is about dignity. It is about the children in Zambia who deserve to eat, the women in Kulna who rebuilt their lives, and the islanders of Kiribati who refuse to give up hope. The heart of the Amazon is beating here in Belém. Let us make sure our political hearts beat with it, for justice, for resilience, and for our shared human future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Roth, for sharing all of these insights. I think it was particularly moving to hear you highlight all of these challenges from around the world and your experience and observations, and also looking toward some of the different responses that can be taken. When we talk about investment, for example, I believe the UN Environment Programme's Adaptation Gap Report stated that for every dollar that's invested in adaptation, there is a 4 times return on that investment. And hearing some of these impacts, we do understand why this is so worthwhile and why it's so needed to make these investments. And also for highlighting, as well as Ms. Brands-Karius, about the judicial response with this ICJ recent decision linking climate impacts to human rights. And this is another way that people can leverage this decision to demand a response for adaptation. So thank you very much for all of these, sharing all of these thoughts and statements. And we'll now hear from our final panelist, who's Mr. Inya Siriuatu from the Parliament of Fiji. And I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I am grateful that I have the floor after my dear friend Claudio, someone who has seen the devastating effects of climate change, particularly in Fiji and other small island developing states. Let me just take us back to the last session. We heard about that this year we're celebrating the 10th year of the existence of the Paris Agreement. I was there in Paris then, and I just want to put this into context. When we came into Paris in 2015, we, as a small island developing states from the Pacific, we came with the Suva Declaration. One thing about the Suva Declaration, it had the demand for the 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial. That is something that we came up with, and into the Alliance of Small Island States meeting, into the G77 plus China. And that 1.5 ended up in Article 2 of the Paris Agreement. I hope that we will not forget that, because it's very, very important for the vulnerable out there, and particularly from small island developing states. If I may just read Article 2.1a, it states holding the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, and pursuing efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, recognizing that this would significantly reduce the risks and impacts of climate change. The compromise was the 2 degrees, but working towards 1.5. I have this 1.5 badge here on my blazer. If you go to the Pacific Pavilion, this is something that you will get from the Pacific Pavilion. Because for us, 1.5 is to stay alive. And that is why the adaptation and resilience is so important to all of us. We are thankful that we have heard from all the countries that are here that we have our revised NDCs this year, and we have made those national commitments. Most of our NDCs is about mitigation. We all have to contribute towards mitigation, because more mitigation now means lesser adaptation in the future. I say that again, more mitigation now means lesser adaptation in the future. But climate change affects us all, but disproportionately. And we need to keep that at the back of our minds. While the climate crisis is global, its impacts are brutally local and devastatingly unequal. I come from a vulnerable Pacific Island nation. As I've stated, climate change affects us all, but disproportionately. We are contributing towards reducing global warming. That is in our NDCs. But for small island countries like Fiji and other Pacific Island, I see my brother from the Maldives is also here. Adaptation is about survival. It's about survival. We have a right to life. And for us, that is why the adaptation and resilience is so important. We are facing huge challenges. The rising sea level, In Fiji, we have 42 plus local communities that needs to be relocated. We have problems in the Pacific about internal displacement and forced migration across borders. But unfortunately, our friend in here from New York would know that we do not qualify as refugees under the 1951 Convention on Refugees. So what do we do if the adult states come underwater? Where will these people go to? They have a right to life. That is the problem that we face. Internal displacement and forced migration. If the current global temperature continues in its current pathway, if we are not committed to reducing global warming, then definitely some small island states in the Pacific would be underwater. Probably they will lose their sovereignty. So what happens to these states? Forced migration is a big issue. And Claudia has highlighted a few other issues, and I will not repeat them. And that is why, for us, as I've stated, it affects all of us, but disproportionately. And for small island developing states, it is a right to life, a right to existence. And it is very, very critical for us. Be assured, we will contribute in our NDCs to reduce global warming. But at the same time, we ask our friends, particularly in the global north, we've talked about the financing, but let me just share a few things from the Fijian Parliament on what we are doing in as far as adaptation is concerned. I wish to highlight 3 key strategies that we in Fiji are pursuing, and we must all pursue, not only Fiji, but we must all pursue. Firstly, the adaptation considerations must be mainstreamed across and within all national planning processes. Adaptation cannot be a standalone within a policy or a portfolio. It must be the central lens through which we view all operations, policies, tasks, and investments. We have learned the hard way. 2016 was Tropical Cyclone Winston. And I think that was the strongest cyclone in our part of the region. The 3 main things that we learned, and that sort of made us relook at our strategies, made a paradigm shift in our approach, are 3 things. 1, the way we live is changing, what we call the new norm. And our friends in the Caribbean, we in the Pacific, we experience this. Rainfall patterns are changing. And climate-induced disasters. This is the new norm. Because of the new norm, the way we do development must change. And this is where the adaptation and resilience comes into our development agenda. Let's not just do development for the sake of development. It must address resilience. It must address our adaptation policies, because come the next opportunity, we are in a better position if we do respond accordingly to the previous disasters. And therefore, the way we do partnership must also change. Partnership is SDG Goal 17, I think. Our partnerships. Partnerships are so important, and particularly from small island developing states, we don't have the resources. We don't have the technology. It's good that we come together and we can share some of the best practices. And of course, the new technologies that are in existence as well. That's badly needed in small island developing states who lack the capacity and the capability. So the new norm has changed. The way we do development must change, and therefore the way we do development must change. We have high hopes in multilateralism. small island developing states. I say that again, we have high hopes in multilateralism. And that is why such partnerships are so important for us in the way forward. Secondly, promoting equitable resources, equitable access to resources is critical and the basis for delivering climate justice. It's one thing to make our commitments, particularly our nationally determined contributions, but of course, the role of parliaments is to ensure that the resources are allocated accordingly. We do not only pass legislations, but we also ensure that we provide budget support. And that budget support is so important. We've heard from our friends in the previous panel that while waiting for our partners and the global climate financing to come in, that does not stop us from allocating our own resources so that we can do some of the work in our own respective countries. And for that, the role in terms of oversight, participatory budgeting, and transparency is so important. Finally, on the international stage, and that is why we are here, our role as parliamentarians is to be the bridge and to be the watchdog. I said in the recent IPU, the 150th Assembly, that parliaments are the bridge between international commitments and local action. I was involved in the Blue Zone for quite a few years. But in here, this is what I like about the IPU meetings. We have parliamentarians in here, not the executives. What we need to take the Paris Agreement forward is global will, is political will, and commitment. And we need the necessary leadership. I say this, that crucially we must tend to ensure the voices of our constituents are not just heard, but are heeded. We must build the approaches and practices that ensure the potential, rationale, and imperative to adapt to a global crisis is at the forefront of government decision making. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for highlighting all of these challenges and also really the role of parliamentarians in responding to them. And especially for reiterating the topic of internal displacement and forced migration, which is, I believe some countries are already starting to put some plans in place for what can be done for these so-called climate migrants. But in Canada, yes? New Zealand, Australia maybe. But I do believe that this is going to be a topic that will become more prominent in the future. So it is good to start this conversation now so that we can prepare for it as well. Before I take the opportunity to go to statements from the floor, I would just like to give Ms. Brands-Karius a moment to respond, as she has to leave early from the event, and the other speakers will also have an opportunity at the end. So if you would like to share any final thoughts with us while we have you here.
Well, thank you very much, and with apologies that unfortunately, but we all, I think, are pulled into other parts of COP30, which is why we're here. But just very briefly, because it's true, there are two very moving, I think, and really to the point interventions of the reality of what we're facing. But I wanted just to reinforce the point on the ICJ judgment. There's also an Inter-American, of course, Human Rights Court advisory opinion. It's not a judgment, advisory opinion, because it does the importance of really having established that states have obligations. They are legally binding obligations. I think this is really the way forward. And parliaments, of course, as you were saying, your role in legislation, your role in holding the executive governments accountable and making sure the mechanisms are there. But prompted also by the intervention, I wanted to say the obligation on prevention is stressed there. They're not. It's a clarification of the types of obligations. So it's really a document that is worth delving into and using in the process for parliaments as well. But stressing that it also includes explicitly the obligation to cooperate which you were referring to. And I think, and it stresses that it has to be bona fide, in good faith cooperation. It's not a matter of coming together and producing a paper and then saying that we've all cooperated with multilateral. It really means that it has to come with the best effort and not just being a pro forma one. So again, the role of holding the executive governments accountable is absolutely essential through those judgment or advisory opinions, but there are a series of judgments, as also was mentioned. More than 3,000 have actually been court cases have been made across the world in 55 different jurisdictions. We don't hear enough about that. Germany we do hear about, and a few others, but not so many others. And that's of course another route towards accountability that needs to be used as well. But what the advisory opinions establish is really that a clean, healthy, sustainable environment, which has been confirmed by all member states of the United Nations in that General Assembly resolution, is a human right, but it is a precondition for human rights, so that interlinkage with human rights. And I will end on this because it was prompted. I'm very glad you mentioned the right to life. That's, of course, a priori, the fundamental right. Human right is a right to life, but there are also a range of other rights: the right to health, of course, the right to many other, to adequate housing, the right to food, the right to social protection, and all others that are involved. So absolutely happy to be here with you, and I hope we will have many chances all together to use this momentum to bring something forward, both at COP30, but also, of course, what will follow afterwards in the great work that you will have to do at home in all of your different countries. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much for that final statement, and it was a pleasure having you here too. So now we'll take some time to open to some interventions from the floor. So we do have a list of speakers who have already indicated their interest in sharing an intervention. And then afterwards, we'll see if we do have some time for some further ones. So first of all, I would just like to remind everyone to please keep your interventions limited to 2 minutes each. And I will be turning over to Ms. Maria de la Luz from Mexico for the first statement. So you are welcome to come up. Yes.
Gracias por permitirme la palabra. Nos reunimos hoy en la majestuosa ciudad de Belém, puerta de la Amazonía y pulmón de la humanidad. Nos reunimos en un momento de definición para la vida en nuestro planeta. La crisis climática no es una amenaza futura, es una realidad devastadora que ya golpea con furia nuestras comunidades. Sequías que matan los cultivos, inundaciones que arrasan con hogares y un calentamiento global que agudiza la pobreza y la desigualdad en nuestros países. La Amazonía, considerada pulmón del planeta, bomba de agua y reguladora del clima mundial,
we have many things affecting the Amazon forest that is the lung of our planet. And it's living a critical moment where we have deforestation representing 25% of its territory. We need immediate actions that are coordinated by the whole world. This is not a scientific issue. This is reality and the result of a development plan that compromises the balance of the planet and putting at risk food security, health, and dignity of many people today. The global budget represents an ethic challenge and civilizatory challenge of our times. Beyond this issue, we can promote more solutions that are gonna allow more accountability for pollution and bring solutions for more vulnerable populations. We need to listen to traditional communities because they're the guardians of our forests and biodiversity. Their knowledge is a solution and not an obstacle, and we need to guarantee their rights and their direct participation in decision making. We should also have a fair approach. We can't compromise our populations, and we should generate dignity and work and bring more opportunities in Mexico, and we need to give more opportunities for our population. Us congressmen and women in Mexico, we're committed to double the efforts in the protection of our natural resources and also be the voice of the people that don't have this voice. And we want this voice to echo in each corner of our country and continent. Ladies and gentlemen, the Amazon that is welcoming us today is a symbol of resistance. The calling is that for us to not stay in just our words, but start our actions. Thank you, Belén. Thank you, brothers and sisters, for the justice for life, and climate, and sovereignty of all people. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Next up, I'd like to welcome Mr. Vidar Reynisson from Iceland to the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Honorable panelists, dear parliamentarians and IPU colleagues. In Iceland, we experience the effects of climate change every day, not as a distant prediction, but as a real challenge. We face increased number of avalanches, landslides, extreme rain, sea surges, and increasingly severe winter storms. These events remind us that adaptation is not an optional. It is essential for protecting life, livelihoods, and infrastructure. Our approach combines science, preparedness, and strong institutions. Iceland's civil protection system integrates local authorities, emergency services, and national agencies into one coordinated response. We invest in real-time monitoring of weather and geological risk, early warning systems, and infrastructure designed to withstand extreme events, from avalanches barriers to improved drainage and coastal defense. Iceland is directing its development finance towards partners and organizations that deliver concrete impact on the ground across multiple countries and communities. By focusing on practical results and strong local partnership, we aim to make our contribution more effective and transformative. Many of those projects have been presented in different pavilions here on COP30. But resilience is not built by governments alone. Communities play a central role in preparedness, planning, and recovery. Through education, training, and transparent communication, we can ensure that citizens are not only protected, but also empowered. As parliamentarians, our responsibility is to turn lessons into lasting policies, ensuring that adaptation is fully integrated into the national planning and that resources are distributed fairly. At the same time, it's obvious that comprehended action to reduce climate challenges will always be cheaper and more cost-effective. So we have no real option other than to stick together for ourselves, for our future, for our children, for our grandchildren, for our world. Let us reduce climate challenges with effective mitigation and strengthening adaptation, a shared commitment, protecting people today while preparing our society for the challenges of tomorrow. Obrigado.
Thank you very much. We will next turn to Ms. Monika Bartos from Hungary. Thank you. Welcome up. And just to give early warning, afterwards we'll follow Mr. Angelo Bonelli from Italy. Thank you. Okay. Okay, looks like we got the thumbs up. We can continue. So, Mr. Bonelli, please welcome to the floor, and apologies for the
Thank you very much. I'm Angelo Bonelli, member of the Italian Parliament of the Green Party. Eu vou falar português para agradecer ao governo brasileiro e estadual do Pará pela hospitalidade. A crise climática é também um grande questão social. As políticas de adaptação precisam de recursos.
But now, the war policies and the armament run the risk of marginalizing the climate agenda. The president of the US, Donald Trump, called climate change a fake or a mistake. On the other hand, the president of Russia, Putin, is financing war with the sale of oil and gas. Russia has 47 trillion of cubic meters of gas. Do you know what can happen with this data? In Europe, this number would be enough to supply the needs of gas of the entire Europe for the next 100 years. Here we're going to be checking why. The US, which is the first gas producer, liquid gas producer, and also Russia, they have a problem against the climate policy in the world. The costs of adaptation in all over the world is still under debate, but the financing goals established internationally is mobilize 1.3 trillion of US dollars to support the countries in development, to protect local communities, indigenous people, water, forest, and vulnerable populations. But in 24, the global expenditure with arms reached the record number of $2,700,000,000. 2.7. We need to build a great alliance to make concrete the energy transition and to free us of the dependency of fossil fuels, also responsible for conflicts and for the war. We need to discuss the ecological debt that the rich industrious countries that explore the most the natural resources have with the poor countries. I think that the politics, all the parliamentarians in the world should face this problem or fight this problem. On one side, there's a war that is using a lot of resources that's causing poverty, and on the other side, indigenous local communities that want resources and want to defend. As the Mr. that talked about the Fiji Islands, it was a very important speech. It's not just his speech, but all over the world, all local communities that need help in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bonelli. We'll next turn to Mr. Abdullah Rifal from the Maldives. I welcome you to the floor for the next 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, my dear colleagues. The fear of climate change in the Maldives is a profound and daily reality for its people, rooted in the immediate threats to their homes, livelihoods, and the very existence of their nation. It's an essential concern that it felt from the highest level of the government down to individual citizens, especially the youth. Existing threats: sea level rise with projections of 0.5 to 1 meter by 2021, up to 80% of the country would become uninhabited by 2050. Loss of homeland, potential for entire population to become climate refugees. Water crisis, saline intrusion, contamination, freshwater resources. Many islands rely on rainwater, which is increasingly scarce. Coral bleaching: over 60% of the coral reefs were bleached in 2016. Reefs protected coasts and support marine life. For Maldivians, climate change is not a distant or abstract issue, but a source of deep-seated anxiety that shapes personal and national identity. Many grow up with this fear. One student recalls having recurrent nightmares as a child about her island sinking and losing their family. Even elementary school conversations revolve around the question, "Did you know that we are sinking?" Confronted with these threats, the Maldivians is not passively waiting. The government and its people are actively fighting to adapt and survive. Through their emphasizes the international support to crucial. In the Maldives, the Parliament, People's Majlis, delivers a climate adaptation through combination of legislation actions, international advocacy, and fostering partnership to fund and implement crucial resilience projects. Passing the Climate Emergency Act, National Adaptation Program of Action, and Strategic National Action Plan, integrating DRR and CCA. In creating legal framework for net zero by 2030, mainstreaming adaptation into national development. We are also a leader in advocacy, founding the Climate Vulnerability Forum, championing early warning for all initiative implies voice of vulnerable nations, ensuring multi-hazard early warning for all Maldivians by 2027. Hosting the CVC and V20 Secretariat, approving President-level EW for all roadmap, brokers, solutions and attracts finance, mobilizing resources, coordinating UN agencies for implementation. The Maldivian Parliament works in the part of a broader, holistic national strategy that combines different types of interventions. A central theme in the Maldives adaptation efforts is the largest needs for accessible finance. The country already spends an estimated 50% of its national budget on adaptation, diverting funds from other critical development areas. The challenges of complex bureaucracy and strategic requirement for global climate funds make it difficult for small nations like the Maldives to secure needed finance quickly. We need your support. We need developed countries to provide easy access to climate finance. We need to live. Our future generations need to survive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll turn to a representative from Greece, Mr. Emmanuel Christodouloulis. And apologies for my pronunciation.
Dear colleagues from all around the world, it's really an honor to address the 30th United Nations Climate Change Conference at a really crucial time, critical time for our consistency and commitment to climate response. I come from Greece, a country where wildfires, floods, droughts, and of course loss of farmland, every single moment reminds us and indicates us that climate resilience is not just a choice. It's a national necessity. It's the right to exist, the right to life. So this means that the discussion on green transition, on sustainability, and of course on climate adaptation must be based on two key principles. First, it must be fair building public and social trust, and of course leaving no one behind. And second, it must be non-partisan, ensuring continuity in policies and of course in strategies, ensuring accountability and credibility. This is exactly where the role of our parliaments becomes essential as the most appropriate institutions to guarantee that, first of all, the global goal on adaptation will be translated into national adaptation strategies, that these strategies are integrated across all policy sectors, such as agriculture, such as tourism, water resources, and urban development, that these strategies are tailored to each region's specific needs, that they follow a holistic and non-fragmented approach linked to spatial planning and, of course, to investment decisions. And finally, that there is a climate check mandatory for all our new bills introduced in our parliaments, assessing their environmental and, of course, their adaptation impact. We must be sure today that climate crisis will not wait for us, not even a single moment more. This means that time for action is now, and time for the action agenda is now. Mitigation, adaptation, financing, technology, capacity building, and of course social inclusion. Because finally, the transition either will be fair or it will not even exist. As mentioned before, it's not a matter of charity. It's justice and it's dignity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your statement. And next I'd like to turn to Mr. Manuel Rahesane from Mozambique. And apologies again for the mispronunciation.
Obrigado.
Thank you.
Obrigado.
Thank you.
Agradeço pela concessão da palavra.
And I renew my greetings in the name of the President of the Assembly of Mozambique, Margarida Talá, all present here in this room. The topic and debate and debate reinforcing resilience and how the parliamentarians can contribute for adaptation puts us before one of the permanent issues of our time. Climate change are not just a foresight, but they are the day-to-day events, particularly for countries such as Mozambique, that are among the most vulnerable in the world to the climate impact. The Mozambican Parliament has played a role that is determinant in the creation of a legislative framework and oversight aligned with adaptation goals and follow up closely the implementation of national strategies for the effect, emphasis, and the use the funds destined for climate resiliency. However, we recognize that adaptation demands a technical resource and financial recourse significant, and that's why we need to remove bureaucracy in the availability of resources for climatic funds for the countries that suffer with the climate effects, as has defended our Chief of State, Daniel Chapter. We should reinforce the parliamentarian leadership in the agenda of adaptation, not just to protect the planet, but also to preserve human dignity. This action requires political courage and collective vision so that we can transform the world for the good of the next generations. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for all of these very impactful interventions from the floor. We do have a bit more time now. If anybody here wants to give an intervention or perhaps has a question for one of our panelists, can raise your hand. Yes, you will. No questions, no interventions? Okay, then I'll take the opportunity to turn back to our two panelists who are still here to perhaps give some closing final takeaway remarks. Let's first hear from Mr. Seriroatu from Fiji to share with us just some of your closing thoughts.
Thank you. I'd just like to conclude by saying that in adaptation there are gaps. There was a 2024 UNEP report. And while the efforts undertaken by the 87% of all the nations is acknowledged, but there are still gaps in the implementation of the respective adaptation plans. And for that, as we have heard from most of the parliamentarians who have taken the floor today, it's important that financing is made available. And that is very, very important. And lastly, I've said this once and I'll say it again, while reducing emissions must remain the top global priority, but improving adaptation, especially in low-income countries on the front lines of the climate crisis, is critical to protect people, livelihoods, and ecosystems. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this final statement. Thank you. And now I'd like to turn back to Ms. Roth, who can share some of your
thank you very much. I hope you felt the same like me, that this was a very moving and touching discussion. And I think that the IPU has a special responsibility, perhaps a historic responsibility and chance to be a loud voice against all those who are ignoring or neglecting the climate crisis, or speaking about fake. And we have to be a loud voice to make clear that the climate crisis does not happen on another planet or in the next century, but the future is really today. It is in Fiji, it is in the Maldives. But what the moderator said, I'm also coming from a mountain area in Germany. We had glaciers, there are no more glaciers, and the consequences is that there is a lack of water. So we are all responsible, because climate crisis is everywhere. And second, finances. Yeah, the problem is really even more difficult, because Trump also destroyed US aid. And US aid covered around 40% of development projects and humanitarian aid, and helped a lot, for example, for the Global Fund to fight against HIV, malaria, tuberculosis. Now it's our responsibility to compensate this, and not also to cut the finances for climate financing. I'm really very critical also against my own government that there are cuts and not an increase, and this is dramatic after US aid doesn't exist anymore. And what is important for Belém this time and this conference is the direct finances for those who are protecting our climate, and that's the indigenous people in the Amazon. They are the protectors of our climate, and they need us direct support, and I think that's important. And if we are here in the Amazon is the lungs of our world, so if the Amazon is collapsing, it's also a problem in Bavaria, where I'm coming from. Third point I wanted to mention, my friend from Fiji said partnership is really important. Yes, partnership is important. We have to strengthen the partners in the civic society, the NGOs, in times where shrinking spaces are getting increase. but also partnership with industry and with those, because I think the future of any industry is a green industry and not the fossil idea. The perspective is important because the climate crisis is not gender neutral. So in our projects, we should also especially support women. They have a very special burden of the consequences of the crisis, but also a specific role if it comes to food security, if it comes to a sustainable form of agriculture. And the last point, and this really broke my heart in Fiji and in Kiribati, when the fisherman family said, "Where shall we go to?" When in Kiribati, young people said to me, "Where shall we go to if Kiribati doesn't exist anymore?" And then we learned that New Zealand started with climate visas. That is good, but only those who can work will get a visa. What about the old grandmother? What about the young child that cannot work? So therefore we discussed that we need something really strong. We need a kind of climate passport. The idea was a little bit based on the Nansen passport. That is something which existed after the First World War, giving those who were stateless the possibility to enter two countries. And the climate passport would give people the chance to enter those countries who are responsible for the climate crisis. You can imagine that's not very popular, also in my country, this idea. But if we speak about responsibility, we should not do it only on Sunday speeches, but we should do it really in reality, and we are historically responsible. Thank you for this moment I could share with you together, and I'm looking forward to continue an intense exchange of experiences, work, and of power and energy we get from each other in the next meetings. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Roth, and thank you to all of those who have contributed to the discussion today. I wish I could share insights from all of them, but there were some key moments, also some key statements talking about climate impacts of war, the role and respect for indigenous peoples in fighting the climate crisis, the importance of local initiatives, concrete actions that we can take during COP30 negotiations, and one that really stood out to me, which is that we're also talking here about the right to life. And for some of us, maybe 1.5 degrees is a number, it's a negotiation, it's something where we're trying to do mathematically, but for others, 1.5 degrees is to stay alive. And so adaptation is really key and vital to achieving that and to making sure that people do have the right to a healthy and safe environment. And parliaments play a very crucial role in this and ensuring that those efforts are guided by human rights, the needs of the most vulnerable, and local realities. So thank you all so much for this truly fruitful discussion. I'd like to close this session and please enjoy lunch.
Encerramos agora as atividades do período da manhã. Retornaremos às 14h com a terceira sessão de trabalho com o tema Gases Não Carbônicos em Foco, ação parlamentar sobre o metano. Convidamos os participantes desse encontro a se dirigirem ao restaurante localizado no mezanino, onde será servido o almoço.